drawing today, guys. So my students know I'm quite clumsy. So thank you guys for not putting stuff up here. So my name is Dr. Jamie Goodall, and that is a change that I am still embracing. I just graduated officially with my PhD May of last year. So thank you. So when the idea of embracing change came up for this TED Talk, I thought, what in the world could I talk about? And one of the things that I thought that I could talk about is the fact that my background and the amount of times that I have had to embrace change in my life has affected my pedagogy and how I interact with my students. And since we have mostly students in here, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about how I come up with my pedagogy in such a way that maybe you guys will understand where some of your faculty members might be coming from. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has come before today, because they made this look so easy. It's not. It's one thing when I'm in my classroom, because I feel like, I just look at the back and nobody's there, but there's a lot of people here today. So why should you listen to me? First of all, y'all don't know this about me, but I am the queen of Snapchat. So for everybody who's been talking about Snapchat today, I'm the competition. But technology informs pretty much everything that I have decided to do as far as my teaching is concerned. I know that my students are growing up in a digital age, and there's a lot of myths about what that means. And so in order to kind of talk about how I got to this point, maybe you should know a little bit about who I am. I am a first-generation college student. Neither of my parents went to college. In fact, my father had to drop out of high school at one point to help care for his family, going back for a GED when he joined the Navy. And so being a Navy brat, I moved around a lot. I was forced to embrace change, whether I wanted to or not, and to make new friends. And in that process, I learned that embracing change didn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, and that you don't have to embrace change simply for the sake of embracing change. So this was my little bubble for about 15 years or so. After my dad got out of the Navy, I was about 8 or 9 years old, and we settled in North Carolina. You can't really tell the difference between the star colors, but the little red star there in the Piedmont region, that's where we settled. Statesville, North Carolina, just north of Charlotte. And my family was lower middle class, to put it mildly, and I was made fun of a lot in school. I grew up in a single-wide trailer, so you can imagine the jokes that students would play. And it was not expected that I would go to college. My parents, of course, always told me I could do anything I wanted to. They told me I was smart and that I could achieve anything. But the fact was, even though many of my classmates did go on to college, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that that's where we would go. It was totally acceptable, and as it should be, to just stay where we were and to work locally, that you didn't have to go to college. But I said, no, I'm going to go to college. And my mom helped me scrape together $50 to put in one college application. So this was all or nothing, and if I got rejected, that was it. There was nothing else. And so we got that application in, and I got in. I was accepted to Appalachian State, the little yellow star there in the mountains, and what should have been the happiest moment of my life, the opportunity to embrace new change, going to college, was actually devastating, because I got the note saying that I had to put down $300 deposit to secure my spot. How was I going to come up with $300 in 2 weeks when I had barely gotten $50 together for an application? My AP English teacher found me skipping lunch, as I often did, because free and reduced lunch only goes so far. And I was crying. And he was like, what is wrong? What's going on? There's nothing we can't fix. Let's talk about it. And I explained to him my situation, and I said, look, this is such an exciting opportunity, but I'm just not going to be able to do it. I'm going to be stuck here. I'm going to, work paycheck to paycheck, direct deposit to direct deposit, just like my parents were doing. And they worked really hard, but it felt like a cycle I would never get out of. And I put it out of my mind, continue my classes. A couple weeks later, I get a note saying, congratulations, we're excited to have you here. Here's your orientation information, and these are the dorm options for you. And I was like, what? Mom, what did you do? Did you sell an organ out there and I didn't know about it? And she was like, I didn't do anything. What are you talking about? And I don't know, we're talking 10-ish years later. I'm losing track. I'm getting old, guys. I don't know if I've made this memory up, if I've altered this memory in some way in my mind, but I am pretty confident that that AP English teacher paid that deposit without telling me. And I was able to go to college because somebody decided that it was worth a chance. And so I did. I embraced change. I went and did my bachelor's degree. And I'm here to tell you, if you get to college and you have no idea what you want to do, that's totally fine. Because if you think for a moment that that moment meant I was going to be a teacher, sorry to disappoint you guys. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea what my passion was. Because for so long, coming from a fairly impoverished background, the only thing I could think of is I want a job that's going to make me a lot of money. Because I don't want to live like this. And I was going to be a medical doctor or some CEO banker or something, I don't know. But I didn't know what I was passionate about. And I realized that I loved history, and my mom had all these Time Life books, and I thought, I'll do something related to history, but history's not going to make you a lot of money. And in my mind, for whatever reason, I thought, archaeology would make me money. It won't. It won't. But I was going to live out my fantasy life as Indiana Jones, and I did my archaeological dig, which was required for my bachelor's degree. And I found out very quickly, you can't see in this photograph of me here with our sweet setup, but that's me in a back brace, because I herniated 3 discs in my back the first week of field school. Because you can imagine, you're like hunched over all this stuff, and you're digging, you got your little, brush, trying to brush stuff off, and yeah, my back said no. I get that you're only 19, but that's not going to last for long. So I thought, crap, well, there goes that idea. But I was too far into it. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in archaeology, and I was like, well, what else could I possibly do? So it was time to embrace change again. And I said, all right, well, I know how the whole student loan thing works now, so I'm going to get a master's degree, because why not? More money. And I decided I could blend my love of archaeology and my love of history into a profitable field. And again, let me tell you, sorry, PHIST folks, you're not going to make that much money. But I loved it, and I was starting to embrace the idea that I could do something that I loved and get through it even if I wasn't going to make a lot of money. So I did my master's degree in public history with a concentration in museum studies, and that's me with my youngest brother there. Back when emo thing was still good. He's going to kill me for this later. But I did my internship, and for me, that internship was the most boring thing I had ever done in my entire life. And let me tell you, I sat through a lot of dental appointments, so I know what boring is. And I was like, here I am, I'm embracing change, I keep doing it, why can't I figure this out? Everybody else has it figured out. All of my colleagues knew what they were going to do. And I was like nearing graduation, and I was like, I'm going to graduate with my master's, and I'm going to end up in something I hate. What do I do? And so I was talking with one of my professors, Dr. Sheila Phipps. I took her women's history class, and she was like, well, what is it that you've really enjoyed while you've been working on your master's degree? And that's when it hit me. It took me a little bit longer to figure this out, but being a TA, a teaching assistant, getting to design assignments alongside the professors, getting to grade those assignments, yeah. I'm the weird one who likes to grade, mostly because I use it as a distraction from other things, but I loved grading, I loved helping students figure out the things that I didn't have somebody helping me figure out as a first-generation college student. All of my colleagues knew what offices to go to and who to talk to and what letters of recommendation were and what a CV was or what a resume was, and I didn't know any of those things. I felt so far behind, so I thought, I love helping students do that. So I decided to get a PhD in history, because then I could teach, and I could teach at the college level and help those students. But boy, not only did I learn a lot about history in that PhD program, but I learned that apparently people in the PhD program hate it, but they still expect you to do it, right? And there were all of these, complaints that I heard over and over again, even from my own advisors, that you're never going to get a job in the field because it's so competitive. Teaching online is awful. All those online classes are terrible, and that you get your degree, but you're going to be thousands of dollars in debt, and the job market's not good. And so I hear all these lamentations, and hearing my professors complain about students and their tech addictions and how technology in the classroom is a terrible idea. None of my professors used PowerPoint because they hated it. And I thought, why are we so afraid of technology in the classroom? I get it. Technology is distracting. I always tell my students can confirm this, when I tell them not to use their cell phones in class unless it's an emergency, that nobody looks down at their lap and smiles unless they have a problem. So I know when you're texting, all right? I know when you're texting, I know when you're on Facebook, and I'm not going to call you out on it. And I get it, there are distractions, but those distractions don't have to be distractions. We can incorporate that into the classroom. And I bought into these complaints for a long time, because who was I as a lowly PhD student to disagree with all of the experts who came before me, all of these people who were advising me, and even the literature seemed to agree with them. Stuart Butler, who works for the well-respected Brookings Institute in 2013, had said that the traditional brick-and-mortar college should die, essentially, that it didn't hold a place anymore, that the core business function of the contractor college, which he said should replace the traditional institution, would be assembly and quality control rather than running an institution and hiring faculty or holding classes. Some of my students might be like, yeah, sounds like a great idea. I love this. This is basically an idea in which a student would pick and choose classes from a variety of places and create sort of a, package deal. And in theory, I think it sounds really good, but it also feeds into what Dr. Alex Hope said on his blog about the future academic, in which he said that the academic of the future will not be tied to an institution. Sorry, Dr. Hope, I actually love being tied to my institution. But that they will be thought leaders and communicators, and they will teach a range of things, and they will engage in a variety of things, and they will do so on a freelance model. That's called an adjunct, and we already treat them poor enough. Those adjuncts are brilliant, they're great educators, and this feeds into the idea that we should continue to treat them as they are. And I wholeheartedly disagree with him. Because not only am I tied to my institution, that doesn't mean that I'm not a thought leader. It doesn't mean that I'm not a good communicator or undertaking a variety of things and imparting that to my students. And so I thought, reading about colleges who had banned laptops from their classrooms and those sorts of things, how could I talk to my peers, my fellow educators, about embracing this change, not for the sake of just embracing change, right? You shouldn't embrace technology in the classroom just to do it. It has to serve a purpose. And so it helped to inform my pedagogical principles. These 4 things here are the foundation of what I believe as far as teaching is concerned, that teaching and learning should be about passion, creativity, fostering independence, and providing clarity. And you can do that with technology in meaningful ways. And so today, my examples are based on my experiences. I'm in history, I'm in the humanities, and these examples might work better in that format. But it is not to say that it can't work in STEM fields or others. And it's not to say, again, that you do it just for the sake of doing it. I wanted my students to understand, because the number one thing I hear from students is that they hate history. Nobody hates history. They just feel that they're bad at it. And nobody's bad at it. They've just been taught that history is rote memorization of names, dates, places, and events. And the reality is that doesn't have to be that way. And by using technology, I'm helping them to see that they can relate history to their fields. And I think part of the reason that digital technology in the classroom hasn't been nearly as successful as it could be is because, A, as educators, we're not taught how to do it, right? And then also we assume that our students are already well versed in the digital world, this myth of the digital native. And this myth has been well explored by experts in the past, like Kathy Davidson and others, but our very own Dr. Amanda LaCastro in the English program, who is the professor of digital rhetoric, has explored this myth of the digital native and helping us to understand why those assumptions are creating a situation in which our assignment or course design based around technology has not been as successful as it could be. In part because we assume students already understand multimedia, that they know what a folksonomic element is. If I said that word folksonomic element, do you have any idea what I'm talking about? If I said tag, you know what a tag is, right? You know what it is, and in some cases there are people who are better at using it than others. My husband has a hashtag that he'll use, it's the only one he'll use in social media, that says hashtag Jamie uses too many hashtags. Doesn't matter what he's posting, that's what he puts, because I include quite a lot of tags on my digital postings. And then also, we assume they already know about digital writing because they're posting on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. But the reality is they're not well versed in this necessarily, and neither are we. And so we need to create our assignments and scaffold them in such a way that we build digital literacy practices into those assignments. And then it has to be done with careful attention to the rhetoric we use in the assignment design and providing intentional instruction. And so for some examples of some projects that my students have done for me is I tell them to pick a topic that most interests them, depending on the survey that we're in, world history, American history, or whatever. And this is a work in progress for me because I am learning the problems with the digital native myth and the fact that I have to be ever explicit in my instructions. And so these are some of the examples. The first, this Twitter pair, they tweeted back and forth at each other as Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. I don't know if you can see their handles, but you got at ya boy T. Jeff, 1776. So he was a little more creative than his partner at A. Hamilton, 1776. But I found that they had fairly similar digital literacy and that it wasn't great. They did fine for the assignment, but the fact is the only tag they used was the one I gave them, which linked it to our class, and there were no multimedia elements to their postings whatsoever. And so this was a learning process for me that this is something I have to teach them. I have to build it in. I had another Twitter pair with mixed levels of digital literacy. And so you have to be cautious when you have students where one is very proficient and one isn't, because that's going to affect the outcome of that group project. I can only show you the one because the Scotch villainy there, the Scotchman, he turned that into his personal Twitter page, and you don't want to see that. But in my piracy class, they tweeted at each other as if they were a colonial governor and a pirate. And they used a little bit more in terms of those folksonomic elements. You can see that they included a video at one point, but very little of that. And so I learned with these Twitter projects that, you know, I have to work with them to teach them these things. And even though they got a lot out of it, there's still more that they could get out of it. And I think by embracing this change, we can engage our students in ways that are more appealing in different ways. I also learn stuff by doing these digital projects because I allow them to operate on a multitude of platforms. In this case, one of my African American history students created a trip line. I had never heard of this before, and now that I have, I just want to use it all the time. But basically, you can create your own road trip, and in this case, she did it by pinpointing key plots along the freedom riders throughout the civil rights movement, and she created what would be a road trip for anybody who wanted to take that freedom ride and understand what that meant. And it's not just a map. She had to go into each of those spots and create little plot points, and she included images, and she included quotes and primary sources, and she taught me a lot about how digital applications could be effective as a learning tool. And so this was one of the highlights of this process. I allow my students to use PowerPoint. It's my least favorite form of allowing students to create digital projects, just because I feel like the assumption is that it's easy, and then when students do it, they don't put in nearly as much effort as they might on others. But I force them to treat the PowerPoint not as a PowerPoint, but as a digital representation of a museum exhibit. And in this case, I've learned that by providing them with those explicit instructions on how to do that in ways that are effective, I'm getting very interesting projects. So in this case, she literally found a theme that looks like you're walking through a museum. It looks like it has a floor. And she made it look like those are actual sculptures. And she learned through the process how to balance text with images and creating space in a way that is visually not only appealing, but keeps the audience's attention. And so the vast majority of these students are not public history majors. They're majoring in all kinds of different things, right? And it's important because in digital presentations especially, I find that students use a ton of text. They treat the visual and digital as if it were a paper, because that's traditionally what they associate with history. And so by using this digital model and working with them to figure out how to balance those elements out, they're learning that history can be different. You can do blogs in my class as your project. This student decided that for her topic about the Persian Empire, she was going to create a blog and educate all of Tumblr. So this is public. Anybody who's on Tumblr has access to her project, and who knows who she's going to reach, right? And you could see that she already had a bit of digital literacy before I worked with her, because she was already using tags and links and images. And so I had other students whose blogs had nothing but text. And I don't know if you've ever tried to read a blog that is nothing but text, but it's boring. You lose interest very quickly, and you're going to go to the next page. You're going to go somewhere else. And so by learning how to incorporate these digital elements, she was able to keep her audience's attention longer. Another one that I had never heard of is Tiki Toki. It is an interactive timeline piece. Timelines are traditional. They are a traditional mode of doing history. But this student took it and made it modern. And she used it in such a way to integrate digital technology into our classroom. And so with Tiki Toki, you create a timeline for an event. She actually used this as part of something from her major. She was like a finance major or something along those lines. And she decided that she was going to talk about financial structures in the colonization period. Not to get into the history part, but she figured out a way to break it up into pieces and to incorporate, who would think that you would incorporate images and that sort of thing into financial structures in the colonial era. But she managed to do it with the slave receipts. When she starts talking about the slave trade, she found images of 17th and 18th century slave receipts. She found images from Francis Drake's narrative, and she found ways to incorporate those. And so I just want to kind of leave you, those are some examples, but leave you with some conclusions that you can try to incorporate, whether anybody in here is an educator, maybe you're going to go off into K through 12 education, or even thinking about your own work, ways that you can incorporate the digital into your world, is to not assume that tech is useless or too complicated, right? I know a lot of my older colleagues always say, well, it's just too much. I don't feel like figuring it out. And those are, that's valid. It can be tricky. But there are tons and tons and tons of resources out there. And guess what? My grandparents are on Facebook. It's a little creepy sometimes. My grandmother will go on liking sprees. And I always know that she's a little bored. But tech is never so complicated that it can't be used in some way that is beneficial. Much like any other skill, students are going to have varying proficiency with this digital technology, and if it's something you want to incorporate as a meaningful component to your classroom, or if your professor is incorporating this, talk to them about your proficiency level and say, look, I'm not, maybe they assume you're already proficient in this. And you can say, yeah, maybe I Snapchat 150 times a day, but that doesn't mean I'm great at blogging, right? Or maybe I have a blog, but I don't know how to create a timeline. And so your proficiency level will vary, and that's okay, right? It's a learning process. It's about growing in this technology. And so for professors, but anybody really, you want to think about scaffolding these assignments to target specific skills that you want your students to get out of it. For me, I know that the vast majority of students that I encounter are not history majors. They're not going into the history field. I might get fired for this. I don't care if you walk away from my class remembering that the Ottoman Empire was the most powerful and long-lasting of the Islamic empires in the world history era. Like, that's great if you do walk away remembering that, but as a nursing student, maybe you're like, I don't care. But what I do care that you walk away from my classroom with is the ability to think critically and to make use of the resources and skills that I work with you to develop and use that in your field. And so you want to make sure if you're designing an assignment or even taking on an assignment as a student that you're making sure that those skills are specific and targeting specific goals. I don't do these digital projects with my history students just for the fun of it, although I think some of them think that that's what it is. I'm doing it because there are specific skills that I want them to get out of it. If you routinely incorporate digital technology into your daily life or your classroom, it becomes a natural extension of your pedagogy or of your experience. And so it becomes something that is easier to do over time, right? And then you want to harness your students' reliance on digital devices, or you as students, you want to make use of that. If professors want to call students tech addicts, that's fine, that's their prerogative, but the reality is that doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? That technology can be useful in the classroom, so harness their social media usage, harness their tech addiction, harness their skills that maybe they have, and use that in a way that is meaningful to the classroom. And let digitally based assignments serve as teachable moments regarding digital presence. In particular, I told you I didn't show you the Scotchman's Twitter thing because he made it personal, but we did have a teachable moment about the fact that it was still public and he was putting a lot of stuff out there he shouldn't, right? You guys hear this all the time, right? That your digital presence is important. But when students create digitally based assignments, sometimes they don't always recognize that, that's still part of their digital presence. Your Facebook might be set to the greatest privacy settings of all time, but that information can still get out there. And if you create a publicly based assignment that has your name on it, as most of my students do, they go and search that, it could pull up your other social media stuff. And so I often use this as an opportunity to talk to my students about their digital presence and about how embracing this change in pedagogy can be very beneficial, not only to the educator, but to the students, because it brings new life to the classroom and it helps to marry our traditional models of lecturing and exams and quizzes, which I know my students loved my quizzes. Yeah. You're not in my class anymore, you don't have to say. But marrying those things that are traditional and show the traditional learning with things that bring excitement and show other avenues of learning. My students think critically, but maybe the exam isn't the best place for them to show me that they're thinking critically. Maybe the quiz isn't the best place to show me that they did the reading, right? So this was kind of my way of bridging what I learned over time and my own personal experiences as a student and my connection with my students today. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goodall. Let's give her another round of applause. All right, so this technically concludes TEDxStevensonU, but before we go, I just want to say, give a couple shout outs. One to Dan for allowing this event to happen. Let's give him a round of applause.